Welcome to another episode of the RESGEN Giving Life Podcast, where we hear stories and have conversations about life in Christ, everyday discipleship, and in ways that we as men can give life to others. My name's Tom Henderson, the founder of RESGEN, and as always, I am humbled and honored that you're tuning in for the podcast. Today's show is going to be a good one as my guest and I talk about a topic that every single one of us deals with, and it's one that we often struggle with as well: conflict. Specifically, how we can manage conflict in a healthy way. Joining me in the conversation today is a friend of mine named Dave Campbell. Dave is a husband, a father of 2 boys, and the founding pastor of Invitation Church. I first met Dave over 15 years ago when he was a college student, and from the first time I met him, I knew that he had wisdom way beyond his years. On today's show, Dave and I visit about some of the overarching reasons we find ourselves having conflict with others, and then unpack the 4 main conflict styles. We also break down some of the core values and tools of communication that can help prevent conflict from being unhealthy, and how we can be more Christlike as we strive to get better at managing the conflicts that arise in our lives. I'm really glad you're joining me today, friends. Here's my conversation with Dave Campbell. Dave Campbell, you made it, dude.
Hey.
RESGEN Giving Life Podcast.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me on. It's good to hang out.
Yeah, dude. This is going to be fun. So we're going to get into a topic today, as I said in the intro, that a lot of people don't talk about, okay? But before we get into that, we first got to find out who the world you are, because this is going to be an introduction to who you are for many people. So give us a snapshot of your life.
Yeah, it's awesome. So I basically grew up around here, kind of from 2000 on, and went to college at USF and met. And
Me? You met?
Well,
that is where you...
I mean, I was going to talk about my wife.
Oh, okay.
But let's make it about you. Okay. That's great. So I met my wife, Michaela. She was one of the cheerleaders on the football team, and I was the middle linebacker, so that worked out really well.
Yeah, and for those of you that are not watching on video, that is not true.
Huge biceps for days. So anyway, met her, married her. We served on residence life staff after graduation for several years. Went to seminary here. We have 2 kids, Griffin, who's 9, Miles, who's 6, and Michaela is a counselor, and so she's got a private practice in Yankton and Vermilion because she kind of does that. And in 2016, I was a part of a team that planted a church called Invitation Church, and that's kind of what I'm doing now. Did youth ministry for a long time, and then transitioned about 6 years ago into church planting. So it's been wild. It's been fun. It's been taxing, the whole thing. So, but yeah, we love Sioux Falls. We love being here, close to family, and it's been great. So yeah.
Well, and Dave and I have a lot of similarities for listeners, just so you know. So we've known each other a long time. I first met Dave probably actually when he was really young, prior to me moving to Portland to be a youth pastor for 6 years. And then when we moved back, that's when I remember meeting you at. I actually spoke at a USF chapel when you were a student, and Michaela was dancing. She did some dancing at that chapel. I recall, like some interpretive type dance stuff or whatever. Liturgical
dance.
That's what it is.
But I mean, we're not keeping score.
Right. Okay. So yes, and then you guys were dating at the time, and so anyway, it's just been fun to watch the maturation of you and your ministry and in your marriage. And now our boys are. I mean, my boys are 18 and 21. Years are 3 years apart, so there's similarities there. Cool. You and I have similar backgrounds as far as just growing up without a dad in the home. So there's a lot of conversations that you and I have had over the years. And in the intro, I know that you laughed at me when I told you this, but I said that you had wisdom beyond your years, and I always really have felt that way. And to the point of where, I love just coming in and just talking about scriptures and when I'm writing new messages and just saying, hey, what do you think about this? And so this is just fun to be able to have this conversation that other people are going to be able to listen in on, especially on a topic that I think a lot of us don't necessarily want to talk about, that we don't know how to talk about, and that we really probably should spend a little bit more time talking about, and that's how to have conflict in a healthy way that can cause relationships to grow as opposed to be torn apart. And I do need to ask you as we get going on this, because it has to be interesting to be married to a counselor
Sure.
who deals with, conversations that are filled with conflict, personal, relational, all those kinds of things.
Yeah.
And so what is that like being married to a counselor? Do you feel like you're stepping into the counseling booth when you have what my wife and I call intense fellowship? And where she's like, evaluating, all of a sudden she slips into counselor mode. How is that?
Oh, yeah. So that's a question that like a lot of people like want to know about. And really, I mean, Michaela is Michaela, right? So It's like part of kind of like her counseling work just like flows out of who she is. I would say I have been helped in my marriage to her in part because of what she does. Like she helps me notice things like about myself that I would not pick up on because of her work. I mean, she just is so dialed in and focused and watches people all day. I mean, sits on a chair in a couch, paying attention to the person in front of her. And a lot of people have jobs where they're more distracted than that, but she's so focused in. So just like small example, I'll be like sitting at the dining room table and my leg will be shaking or something. And she'll just say like, hey, what are you nervous about? Or what's going on? What are you processing? What are you thinking about? And it's kind of that stuff where being married to her, one of the blessings of that is just being able to pay attention more to my internal world. Like, so that's a question she'll ask me a lot. Like, hey, what's going on in your internal world, right? And so she is a huge gift to me. But yeah, that's been probably the thing that I would point to most is she just pays attention to people like nobody else I know. And so that has really, talked about giving life, that's given a lot of life to me as a person. I mean, even outside of being her husband, just as Dave, it's helped me pay attention into my internal world and what's going on in there, which is something a lot of dudes struggle with, and I did early on in our marriage for sure. So but it's, some people think, ooh, is it like when you're doing the dishes, is she like gonna, tell
you look angry?
Yeah. That's just not really what it is, right? But part of how God has equipped, empowered, and anointed her for this work does spill out. So anybody's in a relationship with her is gonna kind of feel those things. But yeah, people get interested.
And that is a gift. I mean, that is a gift to be just fully present and fully focused on the individual. And, that's something that I know that we have to be very purposeful and intentional about being, just as men, as husbands, as dads, even as employees at work or whatever. It's just like saying, hey, I'm going to be fully here. Fully present, even though there may be this other stuff going on in our world, but I'm fully here. And so the gift that you just talked about of her doing that for you and how that's been received is a good encouragement and reminder to me of saying that's a gift. And that as I am fully present, whether that be with Laura or my boys or whoever I'm with, that's a gift to them. And like we can all give that gift every day.
Yeah. That's right.
But it's a choice.
Yeah. Yeah. I love, like Eugene Peterson says, when God gives a gift, he wraps it in a person. Right. And so like he's talking about the incarnation, right? He's talking about Jesus, but also like we're called to live an incarnational life. Right. So when he's going to give a gift to somebody, it's going to come through a person. Right. And so even that call, I think, is something that I've been thinking about more lately of like, ooh, that's such a good word. That's such a good way of life to live into, that God wants to do stuff in the lives of people around me. And I have a role in that. So.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, this. I mean, RESGEN is about helping men restore their relationships with God and others. We're going to get into that restoration just in a little bit here in the conflict stuff, and then helping us grow in our Christ likeness in every way, in every area of our lives.
Yeah.
And so when we understand that as we grow more and more like Jesus, we are helping give that gift to others and give life, right? So, so I love that. All right, so we're going to get in because I know that this time is going to go very, very quickly because we've got a lot of ground to cover. And I just want to tell everybody right now why I wanted to bring Dave on and have this conversation specifically with him. And the reason is because when I was running the youth ministry network here in Sioux Falls, the RESGEN Youth Leaders Network, did that for about 3-4 years.
Yeah.
Before then, the Lord kind of just took us in the direction with the Men's Summit and marriage and podcasts and that kind of stuff. We did one of the lunches where I had you come in and share about just managing conflict in ministry. You had gone through some transitions with different churches and were a part of different things, different leaderships, those kinds of things where you saw some things, you were able to experience some things that kind of gave you a little bit of an education in how to manage conflict, learn what conflict is, what it's not. And I would say that was a really good masterclass for you to becoming the conflict Jedi that you are.
Oh, conflict Jedi. I've never seen Star Wars. Is that a problem? That's a confession.
So that's not true, is it?
I have only seen the one with Jar Jar Binks. What's that called?
That's not even Star Wars. Are you for real right now?
Yeah, I haven't.
Oh my gosh,
I'm gonna get kicked off the podcast.
You gotta like start watching those with your boys.
Yeah,
I mean, because we can't have another generation of Campbells be raised without having seen Star Wars.
Somebody just fell off the treadmill. They're like listening to this. Somebody's mowing the lawn and it's crooked.
Yeah, that's so funny. All right, so but tell me, like, before we get into this, because we're gonna go kind of like into conflict management styles. We're gonna get to like what are some overarching things of conflict. But how did you become a little bit more aware of like just what conflict is, what it's not, and to the point of where you have a pretty decent, I mean, you got a really good understanding, Dave, on conflict stuff. So where did that come from? Was that something that just kind of happened because of your experiences?
Yeah, I think that's part of it. I mean, I think part of being in a leadership position you're in the spotlight, right? Like as a pastor, like you just are, right? And so, there's at any one time 50, 100, 150 people, whoever is big as your church is going to be, right? There's people who want to share their thoughts, their opinions with you, and we're in relationship, right? And relationship is messy. And so there's going to be conflict, right? And so the question isn't like, is conflict going to happen? Like the question is like, what's the conflict going to produce? And I saw really two things. I saw conflict produce a lot of bitterness and resentment and disconnection, but I also saw some good things that conflict produced. Like I also saw it produce connection and maturity and deeper closeness. And then in the context of my marriage even, like, so we got married super young. Michaela and I will celebrate 15 years in August. And so she had just turned 21 when she was married and I was 23, right? So we were very young. And I did not step into that marriage ready to deal with just typical conflicts that come up, right? And so that was really like an education. And we really together, what's cool about us is we really like grew up together, right? We didn't step into marriage, at 35 or 40 with a bunch of things figured out, right? We were still in college when we got married. I know you and Laura kind of the same way, right? But the Lord really did a lot of work in both of our lives to kind of help us. Hey, what's it mean to turn toward one another? What's it mean to grow and how we do conflict and what that means? And then how can we give back, right? How can we allow the work that the Lord has done in us and through us in the life of somebody else? And so the Lord just has like given me opportunities to talk about this, continue to grow in this for sure. Not a Jedi, whatever that is, whatever a Jedi is, I'm not that. But really grateful to be married to somebody in life who is connected in the mental health field where I am constantly learning stuff, either stuff she's reading, stuff she's listening to. And it just like transfers into my day-to-day work with people. And I just think about the homes in this city and around the world where conflict is just not being done well. And there's damage that happens, and any communication, trust, two things are happening. Trust is eroding in any communication, or trust is being matured, right? So that's just true, right? And so even as people are listening to this podcast right now, the fact that I don't know about Star Wars, like trust is being eroded. But you're deciding, are you going to continue to listen to this or are you going to move on? So
well, and I want to encourage you to keep listening because the stuff that you shared with the youth workers and those that were in the room, about 30 of us at the time, really was helpful. And so even at that, I mean, that was before the podcast was even created. But when I told you, this is season 3, and we talked about I'm a big timing guy and all of this, and I just kind of felt like this is the right time to come and have this conversation with you. So one of the things that I think that, as I talked at the beginning, was that we don't like to talk about conflict. We like to avoid conflict. We like to run away from conflict. And so because of that, a lot of the skills of how to they're just underdeveloped. Like, I mean, we just haven't developed skills to do conflict well. Yeah. And the words that you have used in our conversations is manage conflict. Yeah. So why is the word manage conflict such a big thing, first of all?
Yeah, I think because it's ongoing, right? So I think resolving conflict, people, there's some kind of problem and we want to resolve it. Like for the musicians listening to this, there's a note that's a little flat and we want to resolve it. Like we want to get done. We want to figure it out. And that's very transactional. And
that's what guys think too. Is like, hey, here's a problem. And then now I will tell you how to fix it.
Yep. Yeah. But managing conflict is not, how can we get through this as quick as possible? Like a rainstorm. How can we get home as quick as we can? But managing is, how do I stay present in the moment, right? How do I hold the tension of a child who is really upset at my wife or upset at my husband? Or how do I stay in that moment without becoming domineering, without going over the top? How can I teach and model for those around me, hey, this is okay. This is not bad. This is actually an opportunity. So I like to think of conflict as a road. It's a road to a deeper place. But unfortunately, that's not a road that people have spent a lot of time on. And so they kind of dip out before the great things can happen. They kind of leave the movie a half an hour early and it's like, oh, you missed an opportunity for connection. So sometimes you have a miscommunication with somebody, right? And so that's an opportunity to understand from that person's perspective, what were they thinking? What were they feeling? What were they expecting? And then it's an opportunity for them to learn from you so that next time, we even have more trust than we had before. Instead of getting in this cycle, where I want to be proven right, or I'm going to blame you, I'm going to bring up the thing 3 Tuesdays ago or whatever. And I just think for a lot of people, they've not seen conflict done well. And so let's just resolve it, move on, forget about it. It's not that big of a deal. So I'll minimize it. I'll push it down. I'll deny it, whatever you're going to do. But managing is I'm going to stay present in it. I'm going to be in this moment, no matter if it's with a spouse, a coworker, a friend, a family member. And I'm going to lean in. I'm going to get curious. So I think resolving conflict, transactional. I think managing conflict is much more covenantal. We see the covenant, in the scriptures, God saying, this is who I'm going to be. And then this is who I'm calling you to be. We're in this. This is not going to rip us apart. This is going to take us somewhere. So I think that's kind of those two words that I would use, kind of resolving and managing in that kind of context. So
yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. I think that's helpful because I think you're right that a lot of us have grown up seeing conflict done in a very unhealthy way, whether that be with our parents or, in the workplace or whatever. And so our hesitancy sometimes to go into it and manage it is because of just what we've experienced and what we've gone through, what the results of that were. And so it's just, we feel like it's easier to avoid it. It's kind of like if we try to say, well, you know what, it's just easier. I don't really need to worry or take care of this sin. I can just kind of I can just forget about it and not really deal with it. Yeah. But eventually it comes out.
Yes.
And in that time, it also is building a lot of times. And it's creating other things going on. And the same thing is where, okay, you can try to push it down from 3 Tuesdays ago, to use the example you just gave. But in that amount of time, it's still been in there kind of festering. And then all of a sudden there's an eruption. And so what I know that what I want to talk with you about is, okay, so before we get into kind of how we can manage it in a healthy way, I want to first talk about just kind of what are some of the overarching reasons that we find ourselves, having conflict with others, whether that be at work, at home, or really just anywhere where human beings are.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to get into some of the like the conflict, styles.
Yeah, sure.
The four main conflict styles that we talked about. So, so I was just thinking about some of these reasons that we've talked about of why conflict exists.
Yeah. So a couple of things that we've talked about. One is jealousy and insecurity. So if I don't know who I am, and I'm looking to you to tell me who I am, there's going to come a moment when who I truly am is going to bump up against like your image of me, and that's going to cause conflict, right? So you're working on a team, and somebody is performing in a way that you would like to perform. Like you're working for a real estate, broker, and hey, people on the team, really wish I was selling houses like that or whatever, right?
Sure.
And there's an identity thing. So if I don't know that like I'm bringing value into some kind of team, some kind of context, some kind of moment, like there's going to be conflict like that, and you can push it down, you can deny it, but there's going to be a moment where that's going to surface. So that's kind of one thing. Another thing that we can talk about, too, is just like bad communication, right? And so like when communication's happening and it's not healthy, it's not productive. And I kind of think through three things. One would be like the content of our communication. So that's like what's being said. The other thing is, the tone of our content, right? So of our communication. So for some people listening to this, it's like, ooh, yeah, like that's sort of where like I do get into trouble is my tone, right? So sometimes I'll have a John Gottman, who's a marriage guru. He'll kind of talk about psychologist. He'll talk about, the harsh startup, right? So that's when you start at a 10, when you really should start like maybe at a 3.75, right? So some of us are tone people, but some of us are content people. It's like what we're saying, And so I think to kind of look at that and to be able to recognize, ooh, like where is it that I tend to get into trouble? And so,
and even the medium, like the medium of it. So
right.
like, because there's, we've become, I think, so comfortable with technology, whether that be social media or text messaging or whatever, we can go back and forth with trying to manage or deal with or resolve conflict, whatever, by text messaging or, I don't know that anyone's ever won a Facebook argument, but people are still trying to accomplish that. But like, I just know that like for me and Laura, that, if we're having, a disagreement about something or whatever it is, and all of a sudden I can tell like, okay, this is now going to be bigger. That this is not something simple that we need to that we can take care of over text messaging. Because the problem is that number one with texting, and this is that you can't understand tone or emotion or feelings through text. And our brain always goes to reading it in a way that is they're angry, or they're attacking or what have you. And so for the most part, I think that if we're going to truly become good at managing conflict, it has to be done in a face-to-face way, sitting with one another as opposed to, a text war.
Yeah. In that third piece, that tone, the content, and the third one's timing, right? So sometimes in relationships, hey, somebody's ready to discuss the thing that needs to be discussed.
Yeah.
And the other person's like, no, I'm like, I need to think about this more, right?
Yeah.
So like even thinking through that as you're listening to this, you're mowing the lawn, grocery shopping, whatever, where does that happen for you? Is it in your tone? Is it do you find yourself saying stuff that later you're like, I said that again and I hate that, or is it a timing? So is it hard for you to wait to deal with the conflicts you need to deal with? Like, what's it like for you in that space? That's where I would put myself, right? So the way that I continue to grow as a person, that when there's conflict happening in my home, the pacing, my own pacing to step back to like, let this be, we're going to talk about it. Because I would totally lean toward, hey, let's talk about it. Let's all sit down.
Yeah.
How you feeling? Here's how I'm feeling. Let's deal with this thing. But learning to go, the most kind thing that I can do is to check in with the other people and see, hey, are you ready? Would you be ready to talk about, this? So, and another one maybe the last one we can move on to, but the whole like formation of alliances. So this is very much a business world example. So Brene Brown talks about this whole idea of back channeling. So back channeling is when you have a meeting and you don't share the stuff you need to share in the meeting. The meeting's over, and then you have the meeting after the meeting with the one or two people who are like, oh my gosh, that lady is nuts, or that guy is crazy. I cannot believe, right? So that is just going to be destructive in relationships. Instead of saying in the meeting, hey, this decision we're making does not make sense to me. Here's how I feel about it. Can you help me understand? Right? Of not doing that because we want to play Midwest nice. So we're going to wait till meetings over. We'll go down the hall to somebody's office and share what we would have shared. And so, those are some of the overarching, reasons why conflict seems to spring up.
Yeah. And that one that you just mentioned, the last one there on the formation of alliances, of course, that doesn't just happen in the workplace. That happens at our homes, right?
Sure.
I mean, whether that be, the brothers talking to each other and what was mom and dad doing, which, I mean, that's going to probably happen, especially when they're, 6 and 9 or, really when they're 12 and 15 or whatever. Yeah. But you think about just where it's the wife saying, yeah, I don't know what your dad's doing. I don't know what your dad, or, the husband saying, yeah, your mom's, she's out to lunch on that or whatever. And then all of a sudden, it creates division in that family unit that, of course, is to be an example that our kids are learning from of how to manage conflict well. Which that's not surprising to me, because one of the other things I think that why conflict exists is because, I mean, there's just sin in the world, right? I mean, it's just there's a spiritual warfare element to this where the enemy hates us. And I think that we often forget that.
Totally.
I think we often forget that Satan absolutely hates us and wants to destroy us. He wants to destroy our relationships. He wants to destroy our marriages. He wants to destroy our kids, our relationships with our kids. And so if he can continue to kind of get us to think selfishly, I love the word you used just a few minutes ago, and I'm sure you were purposeful in using it, was, the kind thing to do. Because when we're in conflict, most often, we're not necessarily thinking about kindness. If we are, it's being kind to ourselves. But I love that word that you shared, because even though I want to take care of this now, and I think I'm right, or whatever it is, I'd like to take care of this now so we can move on, so we can, salvage this family night or salvage this, whatever. I got to focus on work or whatever. But if that other person doesn't operate with that mentality, that's just going to create more conflict. So the kind thing to do is put myself on the back burner I'm going to put others' needs ahead of my own, is maybe a better way to say that. Other people's needs ahead of my own, and then say, what if we come back in 24 hours? Is that enough time to kind of process? And then we can let, some emotion dissipate. Which, I mean, that's been a huge learning curve for me, because I know that when my emotions are heightened, I'm not at my best. I'm not thinking, my best. I'm not, my words aren't necessarily, what they should be or whatever. And it can be more accusatory, or I can start at a 10, like you said, but the kind thing to do, I thought that was a good word.
Yeah. And something that Michaela has taught me that kind of came out in my own parenting, just saying, Dave, when you are pointing a finger, you're probably not ready to engage in conflict. And that was a moment for me where I was like, ooh, there's a lot of truth there. Yeah. That if I'm not really ready to kind of sit next to you, that because that's a position of authority, right? I'm pointing something out in you that I do not like, or I want you to stop, or whatever. Not that what I'm saying is not true. Or how necessary, you're feeling, or right? Sure, sure. But shows my body is showing that I'm not ready, and so that's just being willing to listen to the people around us, and let's do this well. Let's learn. Let's grow. Let's allow conflict to be the road forward to push the relationship to a new place. So
and it may not be the physical figure, but it may be the darts that you're throwing with your eyes. My boys always used to say to me, Dad, your eyebrows You know, the things like, you know, we know that like when your eyebrows are angry, that's and that would have been good. It's like, hey, when I get the eyebrows, that's not a good time to engage in the conversation, you know? So, so that's good counsel as well. All right. So now that we've kind of said, okay, here's kind of some overarching, you know, reasons, but there's basically 4 main conflict styles.
Yeah.
So let's unpack some of those. And then I want to have us kind of end our time by talking about, okay, what are some healthy ways we can do it, some tools, some core values that we can adopt in our lives.
Yeah, great. So 4 styles we can talk about. So we can talk about avoider, accommodator, advocator, and attacker, and we'll kind of talk about them. So first, avoider. So this is not like a label. This is not meant to be demeaning. It's just an opportunity to kind of do an internal inventory in our internal world and kind of say, okay,
how do I usually deal?
How am I responding to conflict? So, you know, avoiders cope with conflict. Like we all have to find a way to cope with conflict. Like nobody loves it, right? No one is like, oh my gosh, I hope I get to fight with people all day. And not only just random people I love the dearest and most, right? So we have to find a way to cope with it. So avoiders cope with conflict by discrediting its validity. So I'm just going to ignore it. I'm going to deny it. It's whatever, right? I'm going to push it away, right? So no, we're not in a fight. No, we're not having problems. No, we're, you know, not disagreeing, you know, whatever. So, and then accommodators, they cope with conflict by taking things on themselves that don't belong to them, right? So taking too much responsibility. So you and I have a conflict, and if I'm going to accommodate you, then I'm just going to take whatever feelings you have on to myself and like, oh, I did something wrong. It's all on me. Instead of realizing, well, no, there's like a sharing of responsibility, and I'm actually not responsible for your emotions. Like I'm not. Your emotions are your emotions. Brene Brown says, you know, emotions are just data. That's what they are. They're not good. They're not bad. They're not ugly. They just are data. They're giving us information about what's going on. But for too long in my life, I was a big time accommodator. That I would take it on. It's my fault. I can be better. I can do it different. It's my fault. You know, all that. Some of that is like family of origin stuff. Some of that honestly is ministry stuff, because along the way in ministry, I had people tell me that, hey, this thing that happened, that's on you, man. If you would have done this, then this wouldn't have happened, right? And so that kind of had to be discipled out of me a little bit, because it's taking responsibility to like the nth degree. It's taking too much responsibility. I mean, I don't go around Hy-Vee taking stuff out of people's carts and putting it in mine. It's called stealing, right? But if we're accommodating in conflict, like that's what we're doing. We're taking an emotion and we're claiming it, you know, as our own. So avoiders, accommodators, then attackers. So this is when what's happening in the living room turns into a courtroom. So you cope with conflict by achieving or by winning. So like, I'm going to win an argument. I'm going to be proven right. And that's a style, right? So some people, they're like, you're listening to this and you're like, yeah, that hurts. Because I know that when my kid is late coming home, I know when my feelings get hurt in the workplace, I know whenever I get into a conversation with my sister about holidays, like I'm prone to attack. And that's when I am starting at a 10. And I'm in a conflict. So the point of the conflict is like a game of checkers, to win, not to move around the board. But then there's a last style, and that last style is accommodating, or advocating, the advocator style. Yeah. So advocator is kind of what we've been talking about all along the way. The advocator style is for the conflict. You cope with conflict by using it as a bridge, as a road to push the relationship deeper. And so that's obviously like, oh, which one of those do you want to be? Well, duh. Yeah. Right? But it's really like, which of those previous 3 like need to decrease so that the last one can increase, and we can actually use the conflict that we're having to push us forward. And so to not be afraid to engage and dive into some of those deep waters, because it can make the relationship flourish in ways that you maybe wouldn't have ever thought possible. So those are kind of those styles.
So sometimes there's, and I know that it says, hey, this is not meant to be negative or labeled or whatever, but upon hearing those styles, now it's very easy to label ourselves and to get a little bummed because we're like, oh man, you know what? I'm definitely more of an attacker. And I, even when you gave the example of a kid coming home late, and I'm like, okay, so then that causes me to go back in my head to times when my son break curfew and I'd be like, okay, I did not handle that well.
Sure.
Which, and we know when we don't handle stuff well.
Yeah.
I mean, I think for unless you're just completely out to lunch and you just think you're never wrong or whatever, usually we can say like, okay, I handled that poorly.
Yep.
Hopefully in those situations, those do give you opportunities to revisit that conversation, the next day or pretty promptly afterwards, say, you know what, I did not handle that well. And I apologize. I'm trying to grow and, my Christ-likeness. We're going to get into that more as to how we can more Christ-like conflict management at the end. But so you're listening right now. You say, okay, I'm an attacker. I'm an avoider. I'm an accommodator. Hopefully what we want to do is how can we help you make like one step more towards becoming an advocator? Because you're right. That is the goal. We all want to say, yes, we are able to look at conflict in such a healthy way that we consistently use it as a way to move our relationship deeper and closer and forward together. So, so Dave, here we go. So we've kind of got ourselves labeled, for lack of better words. I hate to even say that, but so let's talk about some core values and tools of communication that can help prevent our conflicts from being unhealthy. Because we all want to be healthy in every area of our lives. I mean, that's just the reality. And that's what Christ wants. Christ wants us to be healthy, not just in just certain areas, but in, moving towards full health and growth in all these areas of our lives. So let's just kind of talk about some healthy tools and core values for managing and dealing with conflict.
Yeah, good. So a couple of them. So one that I would share first is just this whole idea of curiosity over certainty, right? So instead of stepping into a conflict, fully knowing everything about the conflict and the person and all of that, it's going, hey, like, help me understand like what you're thinking about, what you're feeling. I would love to hear kind of what's on your mind, on your heart, whatever. Even if that doesn't come out wonderfully calm like that just did, right? Even if that is a higher octane moment, right? So how can we lean into curiosity instead of knowing for sure, right? They did it on purpose. There's some kind of story, right, that we make up in our mind, like when we've been hurt by somebody. We attach, right, some kind of rationale. And our brains do that, right? Because what the brain wants to do, the brain wants to take something complex and make it simple, right? Like we've all, sat in school for years and years and years. And that's what teachers want to do. Let's take something that's up here, that's difficult to understand, and let's bring it down here. So that's what our brain does. So even realizing like if you and I are in a conflict, there will be a story that I'm telling myself, I'm like, how we got here, how this happened. Well, that's leaning towards certainty. But you can also lean toward curiosity, and you can work together with the other person to fill out that story instead of doing it yourself. And so in our conflict with our family members, with our friends, where you can tell like you've hurt somebody or someone's upset, hey, tell me about that, right? Even some kind of, as a pastor, I think of some kind of hard, sad moment, right? So like at a funeral, right? I've really tried to practice this well. Like, hey, talk to me about like what you're feeling today. Instead of deciding when I get there, I know how they're feeling. I know everybody is in this same exact place because grief is complicated. Emotions are complicated. So as we live our life, what's one thing that you could do today just to be more curious. Because would the people who are closest to you, who talk to you the most, interact with you the most, would they consider you a curious person? Or would they say, nah, he's like more certain? That's kind of one thing. Another thing.
Yeah, think about even having that thought as you're cruising through social media.
Completely.
Because like how many people are engaging in these conversations on Facebook are really curious as they're stating their opinions, which are really in their own head 100% fact.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's just not happening. It's rare, right? And that's why you ask, like, at the very beginning, why is this not happening? We just don't have a lot of great models, right? For who's somebody in my life who's done this well. I mean, we're looking at, you're not going to find it, on any kind of networking site, right?
Yeah.
And so it's built for certainty. Like it's built for clicks and retweets and likes and it's built. I mean, this is kind of a different podcast, but it's built for division, right? And it's just sort of how it is. And
so understanding that the curiosity is not just face to face, but
that's right.
As followers of Christ, what we want to do is we want to grow in our consistency, and so to bring that into each interaction that we have, to be consistently curious is something that I thought of as you were saying that.
That's good.
In just each of the arenas that we find ourselves in.
Yeah. And I think another thing I would add, is speaking to behaviors and not character. So when you are in a conflict moment with somebody, letting them know, like, be clear as you can. So Brene Brown says, clear is kind. So as clear as you can be, that's the most helpful. So, hey, when you said this to me, this is how I felt. So tell them the impact, but it's not, this is who you are. Like, you always do this, right? You are this kind of person. No, it's like, hey, this thing that you did, this name that you called me, when you yelled at me, when you left me out, whatever the thing is, right? So speaking to behavior and not character, I think really helps you advocate for the relationship, because it's saying, hey, like, I'm not okay with how things are. So even if you think about, how does God interact with people in the scriptures? That's what he's doing, right? I'm not okay with this. I'm not okay with you chasing after other gods.
Right.
Like, I want you to follow me, love me, serve me. Like, I want to be in a relationship together. And this is getting in the way of that. And so it's being clear enough to speak to whatever that behavior is. So even when our kids were smaller than they are now, when we would, kind of go through, how do we make things right between each other? And yes, it was more resolving than managing because they're small.
Yeah, sure.
But when we would say, hey, when you take somebody's toy or whatever, I'm sorry for taking your toy. That was wrong because. So what are you sorry for? That was wrong because why? Because it belongs to you and not me. Next time I will. Right? This trying to teach them from very young age, this is the wrong, here's the behavior.
Yeah.
That was wrong because it broke some kind of trust value, and then kind of resolving to do it differently next time. And I think, that last, kind of core value piece, is what I would say to people is like, hey, say the 10%. Right. So a lot of times in our communication, there's like a part that we'll leave out. That's like, oh, I like maybe shouldn't like be that truthful. Right. So I'll kind of gloss over that part as a way to kind of soften the interaction, instead of like allowing that person to fully hear and to its vulnerability. Right. And the reason I believe that's so important is the greatest threat to any relationship is resentment. So the worst thing you can let in the door is not the cold winter air that's coming to South Dakota, but resentment. Because resentment tears away at the fabric of relationship. So if we're in conflict, we're doing a lot of fighting today, you and I.
Yeah, seriously. I didn't realize there were so many things between us.
Well, a couple microphones and some stuff. But if I'm only sharing with you part of the story and part of what's going on for me, then it's going to be very easy for me. That is fertile ground for resentment to grow up, because I was not honest with you. Well, you can't do anything about that. You can do nothing about what you don't know. And so
Except form a story.
Right. So as we're talking about how do we do this well, really encouraging people to say, hey, how you're feeling, what's going on in here, that other person, the way that you can advocate for the relationship is by coming to them in vulnerable honesty. And so, that's hard because maybe it's like, it's going to hurt them if I say how they hurt me. I want to kind of protect, this person that I deeply care about. And so I'm not going to say that. Well, then you're only showing up in the relationship partway. So the way that what we talked about at the very beginning, how do I be fully present in this relationship is by being vulnerable, is by saying, hey, so with our kids and coworkers and family and social media, you probably don't want to, that's like a different deal. It's a little bit dangerous, right? To do that, because you're doing it in front of everybody. But in those relationships where there's trust there, to be able to say, hey, let's say the 10%. And that's been the piece, Tom, for me that I have grown the most in. Like if Michaela was at this table, that's the piece that for too long in our relationship along the way, there was a piece that I needed to say, but I didn't. And it's at times held us back. But then there's been a lot of freedom in just embracing that. Of course, we are going to hurt each other because we're human and we're doing our best, of course. But that 10%, there's a lot of power in that 10% because that's a weapon against resentment. So that's kind of that last piece that I think I would share about that.
It's you really have to overcome some fear though to it's easy to say, okay, I'm going to share the other 10%. And this looks different based on the depth and level of the relationship too. I mean, so it's, and the level of trust, the level of like the depth of that relationship, like, hey, I know I can be fully honest with this person because it's not going to, ruin my chance of a promotion. I mean, like you got to be smart with it. But at the same time, when that is established and, how passionate I am about men connecting with other men, and being vulnerable and accountable, band of brothers, just meeting together regularly to encourage one another in their walk with Christ and their marriage and their friendships and their parenting and just in their overall consistency with Christ. But, how many times do we not even in our closest of relationships, do we really allow everything to be said and where we still don't protect or hold things close to the vest? Because deep down, there's still a fear and an insecurity of what would they really think if they really knew me and what I thought about or what I did or whatever, right? So just even in ministry, we have conversations with people all the time, just as ministers, but what are you, what is some of the counsel that you're giving from people to people that are having those feelings of, man, if my wife really knew what was going on the inside of me, I don't know if she would love me, or I don't know if she'd stick around, or I don't know if she may think I'm completely weak or whatever.
Yeah. And I think a lot of that, all these like messages that like we've grown up with. So what does strength look like? Right. So the kind of the picture of that is strength looks like having the answers, having it together and appearing that way, but I think it takes real strength to look at another person. And I'm going to tell you what's true, irregardless of what happens, irregardless of your response, because again, I am not responsible for your response, for your emotion, for whatever that is. But there's a call, I think. What is one of the first questions that we hear in the entire Bible is God saying to Adam, where are you? Like calling you out of this place of hiding. And then in 1 Peter, right, it called us out of darkness into his marvelous light. It doesn't say it called us out of darkness into marvelous light, like with all of your people, right? But unto himself. And so even for the person who says, if my brother, my sister, my spouse, whoever that is, they would not accept me. That fear is keeping you hostage and locked down from stepping into the light that the Lord would lovingly accept you into. So it's like it's looking for a person to fill you and empower you rather than like your Father who is in heaven, right? And so I think that's something that you have to practice. I think if that's not been a practice for you, I think there are some small steps that you can take to become more honest. And so I don't think it's, just going to happen in one day. But hey, if you know that you've been holding some stuff back, what's one thing that you could share today with whoever that person is to let that person know you a little bit more? And I think what's going to happen over time is you're not going to even realize anymore how natural this is to share with that person, what's going on. And so instead of waiting for, whoever's at home for you to ask you, beat them to it. Like be willing to extend and to share. And this is all counter to how most of us grew up, man.
Right. And it is having the courage to do that, and with the right mentality and the right heart. So I mean that's where the curiosity over certainty comes in, listening to understand and not just be understood, and coming in, with the right just mindset of saying, hey, I want to keep this moving in a positive direction as opposed to just being right. And sometimes that is going to require especially like, let's just turn onto the marital end of things. Cause I know many marriages that are having lots of different conflict right now.
Yeah.
And, there's some things that can definitely be taken care of over a cup of coffee in your kitchen, over dinner or something like that, and saying, oh, okay, I didn't really know you felt that way. I'm really sorry. I'll work on getting better. And then, Laura and I, we every couple of weeks, we spend time together and we ask ourselves, we say, hey, so how are we doing? Have I said anything or done anything over the last couple of weeks that was hurtful, whether intentionally or unintentionally?
Yeah.
And so that it doesn't get buried for too long and that kind of thing. But so we purpose ourselves for that. Yeah. With that purpose time. But sometimes it does require an outside individual to listen, and I mean someone like your wife or another counselor that can listen and then say, hey, here's what I'm observing, here's some tools and resources and just maybe a way to think differently, or here's some practices, conversations that I want you to have. But again, that is one of those things that we have to not be filled with shame about if we need to go and do that. And it's okay to do that. Yeah. I think that mental health has become much more on the forefront than ever before. But that doesn't mean it's still not a hurdle to jump over.
Yeah. No, it is, and you use the word shame, right? So, if there's a cousin of resentment that you want to keep right at bay, it's that shame. And well, what's like shame all about, right? So, shame is not that I did something bad, but shame says like I am bad, right? And so if I go to a counselor,
I'm a bad husband, I'm a bad, or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. But we would never say that like, oh, I was playing tennis and I tore my ACL, right? Well, let's go get that looked at, right? I don't know anybody that would not go to an orthopedic and get that taken care of, right? There would not be shame, around that, right? Now, if you're tying your shoe and that happens, maybe that's like a little bit different. Like, oh, stretch a little more before I do that. But we need to talk about this stuff. We need to be talking about the emotional life, and in the context of the church. I feel a lot of sadness that this is not something that's more on the forefront. Like we have a Savior who gets very angry and he builds a whip in the Gospel of John. I don't know if you've ever built a whip because you've been angry. I never have, but we have a Jesus.
I wanted to when I watched Indiana Jones. I don't know if you've seen that movie, but no, I haven't.
I've seen that one.
Okay.
So, and he serves as this example for us. that, anger is not something that we're supposed to push away, to avoid, to not talk about, but what's something that actually the resurrection life is designed to transform. Like, what does angry look like? That Jesus has not just rescued us and he's going to take us away someday, but he's here and he's present, and his spirit desires to get into all of those things, so that my anger before Jesus, it looks a lot different than my anger after Jesus. It's not that it's removed, right? My relationship with grief, like my relationship with my emotional world, is actually accentuated by the faith I have in Jesus. It's not dulled. And I think for a lot of Christians, when I think about the person going to church, listening to a message, singing the newest song, and then going home, I don't think they are hearing enough about the impact, the formative impact of being attuned to your emotional world, and how the gospel actually impacts those things. And so I totally agree with you. I mean, we need to continue to talk about our emotional worlds, and it's not, kind of stereotypical sitting in a circle and, my name's Dave and I struck, right?
Yeah.
No, but let's make this let's help normalize this for people, so that we can be fully known by people. Tim Keller says, what's worse, to be loved and not known, or known and not loved. That there's we will fall on side of that. And for a lot of people, they're loved, but they're not really known. And so they can't be fully loved then.
And then their fear is that if they are known, that they won't be loved.
Exactly right.
But then, but even in our life with Christ,
yes.
Right? Like, oh man, I just don't even think, God could ever love me or give me another chance because I've screwed up so many times. And and then we project that on our other relationships. And so then we just feel that it's easier to just hold back. But I think that's where even just our perspective on conflict is so important, where we understand that, look, it's going to result in something. So how can it, because it's unavoidable. It's in our lives and relationships, because we're human, but how can they move us forward in our relationships? How can we become more of an advocator in our relationships, so that we are able to become more Christ-like in our conflict? So we need to wrap up our conversation here, Dave. But are there some ways that we can become more Christ-like? I mean, I know there are, but I mean, what are some ways that we can become more Christ-like in managing our conflict?
Yeah.
Because I know you're not advocating for everybody to build a whip.
Something that I notice about Jesus, as you read the Gospels, go through the Scriptures, is how willing he is to name things what they are. He's very willing to call some things out of the disciples, asks them like, hey, like, why were you so afraid? Not in a shaming way.
Yeah.
But of naming that fear. Like, why are you so afraid? And I think that is...
in a curious way.
Well, hey, exactly. So what if that's a place where we can start? What if a place where we can start in our conflict with people is start to just admit that? To start by naming what our experience is. Again, hey, it was really hard for me when this happened. Of course, you're not going to go in your boss's office. I'm going to tell you the 10% because I listened to this podcast. So you sit down, Daryl. But it's the wisdom to go, hey, something that's been hard for me lately at this company is this, and I just want you to know. I love working here. I want to continue to be invested in this place, but man, that's been hard. I think that is such a brave thing to do. And it's just something that honestly we see Jesus doing as he has conflict with people, that he's not afraid to enter those places. He's not afraid to name those things. But then we also see in Jesus this intense capacity for forgiveness.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think that's where some of us are too.
That's good, dude. That's good.
Of just a need to do that well. So
yeah, no, that's really good. And I think that if we could all grow in our ability to forgive, and understand that doesn't mean forget, right? And we don't have to. There are times when like you mentioned, timing. Timing is key in all of this, and also I think if we really want to become more Christ-like in how we deal with conflict and how we grow our relationships and anything, I think how much time are we really just asking him to help us with it?
That's right. That's good.
Fill us with the power of his Holy Spirit. Because again, remember, conflict exists because we have an enemy that's attacking us every single day. Mm-hmm. And we underestimate just the war that's going on for our souls.
Yeah.
And so as we're ending our conversation here, I think that's so good to think about, okay, so Jesus willingly enters into those conversations with the right mindset, with care and love on his heart and his mind, right? I mean, that's the motivation for doing that. Mm-hmm. And so what if we began to spend a little bit more time of saying, man, Jesus, would you help me specifically in this area?
Yeah.
Like calling it out to him and saying, I'm struggling with how I deal with conflict with my wife, with my kids, with this coworker, with my neighbor that's driving me crazy because his dog won't stop barking or whatever. I mean, whatever the case may be, will you give me the power of your Holy Spirit to become more like you and the courage to step forward in a Christ-like way to have this important conversation or whatever. And sometimes those conversations aren't going to result in the way that you want them to, or resolve themselves, and then you're going to have a decision to make, okay, well, is this the right place for me to work? Mm-hmm. Is this the right place for me to, live, because that neighbor's not moving, or whatever, but at any rate, no, I think that this has been, I hope it's been helpful for listeners, but every time you and I have these kinds of conversations, I grow and I learn. So this has been helpful again, for me to be able just to kind of ideate and talk with you and hear. And so we end our podcast every episode with something we call the final word, 60 to 90 seconds of something that is just the Lord's put on your heart, in your mind, a shot of encouragement, challenge, whatever, for people that are listening or watching. And so I'd love to know. Do you got a little final word? It doesn't necessarily have to be on this. It could be something different, but what's the final word?
Yeah, I would say it is connected to this, that what can we do to keep things honest in our conflict, even within our own hearts and selves, instead of trying to keep things calm. I was listening to a podcast, and a guy named George Fowler, who's a psychologist, was saying one of the reasons why conflict's so hard is because it's where our wounds came from. And so what we've tried to do is let's just keep things in our world, in our life, in our relationships calm so that we can avoid the wounds. But he said what happens when you do that is you actually create more wounds because you create more disconnection. So the way to have more connection, the way forward from healing is more honesty. And he's not necessarily a person of faith, but I'm like, man, that sounds a lot like Jesus. So instead of keeping things calm, what could we do to keep things honest? And honestly, that's going to start with yourself.
Yeah.
How honest are you being with yourself? You can't be honest with yourself. I guarantee you're not going to be able to be honest with another person. Yeah. And so what if we could start there? I think we could find some greater health in relationship. So that's the final word.
Great. That's great. That's a great final word. So, well, Dave, I appreciate your friendship. I appreciate, just being here with me today and sharing from your heart. And now you need to go and watch Star Wars with your boys.
Oh, okay. Jar Jar Binks.
All right. Thanks, Dave.
Hey, thanks so much, dude.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Dave Campbell today. As always, if you found this episode helpful, I encourage you to share it with others that may find it helpful as well. Also, if you wouldn't mind, I would love for you to take 30 seconds to rate and/or review the podcast, as that is such an easy way to help us grow our audience and our impact. If you'd like to connect more with Dave, you can find him on all the usual social media channels and at invitation605.com. Thanks again for joining me today, everybody. We'll see you next time for another episode of the RESGEN Giving Life Podcast. Until then, continue being men whose life in Christ gives life to others. We'll see you soon.